Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are not just traveling back in time, we're trying to get to the very blueprint of empire itself.
That's a great way to put it. We're talking about a figure who is so foundational that he, in many ways, invented the concept of a superpower, as we might understand it.
We are talking, of course, about Cyrus II,
Right.
better known to history as Cyrus the Great.
It's a title that gets thrown around a lot in history books, the Great. But for Cyrus, who founded the Achaemenid Empire around 550 BC, it's arguably one of the most deserved.
And just to set the scale here for everyone listening, when we say empire, we're not talking about a few city-states loosely tied together. This thing was absolutely massive.
It really was. At its peak, under Cyrus and his immediate successors, it stretched from the Balkans in Europe
All the way in Europe.
all the way to the Indus Valley in what's now Pakistan and India. It was, without exaggeration, the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point.
God, it's hard to even wrap your head around that kind of scale today, let alone 2,500 years ago.
It is. Think about it. It encompassed all the previous major civilized states of the ancient Near East. We're talking about the Medes, the Lydians, and the great prize, Babylon.
To give you a modern comparison, it's sort of like one government controlling everything from, say, Bulgaria all the way to Pakistan.
Exactly. The logistics alone are staggering, and that's really the mission for this deep dive, isn't it?
It is. We want to figure out how a ruler from so long ago, a military conqueror who, let's be honest, undoubtedly had a lot of blood on his hands, how does he manage to earn the title father from his own subjects?
And even more incredibly, the title Messiah from the Jewish people.
Right. That's a rare, rare feat for a guy who essentially took over their world by force.
And that's the central paradox of Cyrus. He was a conqueror, yes. He absolutely built his empire on the sword. There's no getting around that.
Of course.
But he is remembered primarily for tolerance,
Yeah.
for a version of human rights, for administrative genius. He's this incredibly rare figure who is praised by both the Greeks, who usually despise the Persians, and the authors of the Bible.
It's almost like finding a historical figure that everyone agreed to like, which, that in itself makes you a little suspicious.
It does. It makes you want to look closer.
So we have a great stack of sources today to try and crack this code. We've got ancient inscriptions like the famous Cyrus Cylinder.
Which we'll definitely get into.
Oh, yeah. We have accounts from Greek historians like Herodotus and Xenophon who have very different takes. And, of course, religious texts. So let's unpack this.
A great place to start is the name itself. Even 2,500 years later, we are still debating what Cyrus actually means.
And that kind of fits, doesn't it? The debate over his name seems to perfectly mirror the debate over his character.
It really does.
Yeah.
The name in Old Persian is Kuru.
Okay, Kurus. So what are the theories? I saw one that's very grand, linking it to the word for sun, almost like he's the light of the world.
That's a popular one. It comes to us from the later Greek historians Plutarch and Sacius. They connected to the word kalor, which means sun, interpreting it as like the sun.
That fits the mythic quality of his life, right? The radiant king bringing light to civilization. It sounds like great PR.
It's fantastic PR. But modern linguists have other ideas. Some suggest something a bit grittier. There's an Indo-European root that suggests the name might mean humiliator of the enemy in verbal contest.
Wait, the humiliator? That's a totally different vibe.
It is.
That sounds less like a benevolent king and more like a pro wrestler stage name from the 90s. But I kind of like it. It suggests someone who wins through wits, not just brute force.
It certainly implies a different kind of dominance, doesn't it? A strategic one. Then there's another theory from the Elamite language, which suggests it means he who bestows care.
Okay, now we're back to the benevolent ruler, the caregiver.
Exactly. Or it could even mean young bull, suggesting strength and virility. The fact that we can't pin it down is part of the mystique. Was he the Sun King, the clever humiliator, the caring father? As we go through his life, you'll see he was probably all three at different times.
Well, speaking of mystique, we absolutely have to talk about his origin story because if you believe Herodotus, and I know, we should always take Herodotus with a big grain of salt.
A very big grain of salt. He's the father of history, but also maybe the father of lies.
Right. But his version of Cyrus's childhood reads like a Grimm's fairy tale mixed with a particularly bloody soap opera.
Herodotus really delivers on the drama here. He gives us this incredible mythological beginning. It all starts with Cyrus's grandfather, a man named Astyages.
And Astyages was the king of the Median Empire.
Right. At this time, the Medes are the big dogs in the region. The Persians, where Cyrus comes from, are just their vassals, a subject people.
The very empire that Cyrus would eventually overthrow. The irony is baked in from the start.
Precisely. So Astyages has a daughter named Mandane, and the king starts having these terrifying prophetic dreams about her.
Not just bad dreams, but like world-ending visions.
Exactly. In one dream, a flood emerges from his daughter's pelvis and just overwhelms the entire kingdom. In another, a massive vine grows from her and overshadows all of Asia.
Talk about anxiety dreams. I'm guessing his advisors told him this wasn't about good irrigation prospects for the kingdom.
Definitely not. The Magi, his priests and dream interpreters, they look at this and say, "Your Majesty, this is clear as day. Mandane's son will one day overthrow you and rule in your place."
So classic prophecy, classic evil king behavior. Astyages decides to take some rather extreme preventive measures.
He does. When Mandane gives birth to a son, Cyrus, Astyages orders his most trusted general, a man named Harpagus, to take the baby away and kill it.
Just get rid of the problem. But Harpagus doesn't do it right. There's a twist.
Right. And his reasoning is actually very shrewd. Harpagus is a political animal. He doesn't want the blood of the royal family directly on his own hands. He thinks, what if the political winds change? What if Mandane ever comes to power? He doesn't want to be the guy who murdered her son.
So he hedges his bets. He passes the dirty work down the chain of command.
He does. He gives the baby to a shepherd named Mithridates and gives him simple instructions. Leave the child on a mountainside to die of exposure.
But then comes the twist that sets everything in motion. The shepherd's wife had just given birth, but the child was stillborn.
Exactly. So you have this grieving couple holding their own dead infant, and suddenly they're handed this healthy, beautiful, royal baby. They decide to make a switch.
A swap. It's the classic hidden prince trope.
It is. They dress their own stillborn child in the prince's fine clothes, leave him on the mountain for Harpagus's men to find, and they raise Cyrus as their own son.
And for a while, it works. But what I love is how he eventually gets found out. It's not some grand reveal, it's a childhood game.
Yes, he's 10 years old, playing a game with the other village kids, something like King of the Mountain, and he's playing the role of king.
Of course he is.
He starts bossing around the other kids, including the son of a high-ranking nobleman. When the nobleman's kid refuses to obey, Cyrus has him beaten.
And for the adults, this is a huge red flag.
A massive one. In the ancient mindset, nobility was inherent. A shepherd's son just wouldn't have the audacity, the natural authority, to strike a noble son. But a hidden king would. It's in his blood.
So word gets back to Astyages. He summons the boy, and he recognizes the family resemblance. He puts two and two together and figures out he's been duped.
Yeah, he has. And this leads to what is, honestly, one of the most gruesome and chilling moments in all of ancient history. And for anyone listening, you might want to prepare yourselves, because this is where it gets really dark.
Astyages is absolutely furious with his general, Harpagus, for failing to kill the baby all those years ago. But he hides his anger. He pretends to be relieved and invites Harpagus to a celebratory banquet.
It's a scene of pure, calculated horror. Astyages has Harpagus's own son, his only son, secretly killed. He has the boy chopped up, cooked, and served to the father at the feast.
And Harpagus eats it, thinking it's just lamb or mutton.
He eats the meal. And after he's finished, Astyages asks him if he enjoyed it. Then he has his servants bring out a covered platter. They lift the lid, and on the platter are the severed head, hands, and feet of Harpagus's son.
I can't even imagine that moment. The realization, Astyages asks him, "Do you know what beast you have eaten?"
And Harpagus, his reaction is what's so telling. He doesn't scream. He doesn't attack the king. He shows no emotion. He just says he understands and calmly collects the remains of his son to take them home for burial.
That cold, controlled stoicism, that's terrifying.
It's key. It explains everything that happens next. Astyages thinks he has asserted his absolute dominance, that he has broken Harpagus completely, but what he's actually done is create his own worst enemy, an enemy who is now patient and waiting for revenge.
This gruesome story, whether it's true or not, it matters because it sets the stage for the downfall of the entire Median Empire. Harpagus plays the long game.
He absolutely does. So fast forward a bit. Cyrus is allowed to live. Astyages' advisors convince him the prophecy was technically fulfilled because Cyrus acted as a king in that childhood game. A bit of a loophole.
So Cyrus is sent away from the court, back to his biological parents in Persia, in the province of Anshan. He grows up knowing who he is.
And this is where reality starts to merge with the myth. Around 550 BC, Cyrus is now a man, a local leader of the Persians, and he launches a revolt against his grandfather, King Astyages.
The moment the prophecy warned about. So Astyages sends his army to crush this little rebellion. And who does he put in command of the Median army?
Harpagus.
The man who ate his own son at the king's command.
The very same. And you can see where this is going. For years, Harpagus has been secretly communicating with Cyrus, encouraging him to revolt, promising support from the disgruntled Median nobles.
So when the armies meet in battle,
Harpagus doesn't fight. He and a large portion of the Median army defect. They switch sides right there on the battlefield and join Cyrus. It wasn't just a battle. It was a mutiny born of a decade of simmering personal vengeance.
and just like that, the Median army collapses. Cyrus marches on the capital, Ecbatana, and captures his own grandfather.
He does. And in that moment, he goes from being a local vassal prince to the king of the Medes and Persians. This is the birth of the Achaemenid Empire.
But again, he shows a different style. He doesn't execute Astyages. He keeps him at court, treats him with respect.
Yes, though some sources say it was a very comfortable imprisonment. Still, it's not the brutal purge you'd expect. He's already showing his preference for incorporation over annihilation.
But his neighbors are starting to get very, very nervous, specifically a man named Croesus, the king of Lydia.
Yes, in modern-day Turkey. Croesus is famously, fabulously wealthy. The saying, rich as Croesus, comes from him. And he sees this new, unified Persian power on his border and thinks, I need to strike first before this Cyrus gets too strong.
And this is where he makes the classic mistake of consulting the oracle at Delphi.
The high-priced management consultants of the ancient world, as you said. He sends lavish gifts and asks a simple question, should I attack Persia?
And the oracle gives him that famously ambiguous reply.
If you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire.
And Croesus, of course, hears what he wants to hear. Awesome, I'm going to destroy Persia. He completely forgets that he also has a great empire.
It's the ultimate example of oracular ambiguity. So, emboldened by this, Croesus attacks. This leads to the Battle of Fembra in 546 BC, and this is where we see the military genius of Cyrus, or perhaps the genius of his advisors.
Including Harpagus, who is still by his side.
Still there. And the Lydians were famous for their cavalry. It was the best in the world at the time. Heavily armed, on excellent horses, Cyrus was outnumbered and legitimately worried about this cavalry charge.
And this leads to the famous camel strategy. I love this detail because it sounds so completely bizarre to modern ears.
It's brilliant tactical improvisation. Harpagus supposedly comes up with the idea. He knows a simple biological fact. Horses who have never encountered camels absolutely hate the smell and sight of them.
It's such a strange weakness. It's like finding out a tank breaks down if it smells lavender.
It's primal. They just can't stand it. So Cyrus gathers up all the baggage camels from his army's supply train. These aren't war animals. They're just there to carry tents and food.
Right.
He has his men dismount their own horses, and he puts riders on these camels and lines them up on the front line, directly opposite the elite Lydian cavalry.
You have to imagine the scene from the Lydian side. You're a noble knight, on your prize stallion, charging forward, expecting glory, and you're met with this line of strange, lumpy, spitting beasts.
And your horse just goes insane. The Lydian horses panicked, they reared up, they threw their riders, they turned and fled. The entire Lydian cavalry advantage was neutralized before a single spear was thrown.
It's incredible. So with the cavalry gone, Cyrus's infantry rolls up the Lydian army, wins the battle, and eventually besieges and captures the capital, Sardis.
And again, the fate of the conquered king is interesting. The Nabonidus Chronicle, a Babylonian text, suggests Croesus was killed. But Herodotus tells a much more dramatic story where Croesus is about to be burned on a pyre, but is spared at the last minute by Cyrus.
And he becomes an advisor.
And becomes a wise, if sorrowful, advisor in Cyrus's court. It fits the pattern we keep seeing. Cyrus prefers to turn his defeated enemies into assets rather than corpses.
Okay, so he's conquered Media and Lydia. That leaves the biggest prize of all on the table, Babylon.
The great jewel of Mesopotamia. By 539 BC, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was the dominant cultural and economic power in the region. But its king, Nabonidus, was, well, let's just say he was eccentrically unpopular.
Right, he wasn't a traditionalist. He was accused of neglecting the chief god of Babylon, Marduk.
A huge political mistake. He was instead promoting the worship of the moon god, Sin, which upset the powerful and wealthy Marduk priesthood.
And he wasn't even living in the capital for years at a time. He was often in oasis in Arabia, so you have a restive population and a furious clergy.
It's the perfect setup for an invasion.
Yeah.
Cyrus knew all of this. He ran what we would today call a brilliant propaganda campaign before he even marched. He had agents inside the city positioning him as the restorer of tradition, the pious servant of Marduk, even though he was a Persian.
He was going to come and make Babylon great again, essentially.
That was the message. But the city of Babylon itself was a fortress. It had these legendary massive walls, and it had the Euphrates River running right through the middle of it, which acted as a kind of giant moat. It was considered impregnable.
So if you can't go over the walls and you can't go through the gates, you have to find another way, and this is the heist portion of our deep dive.
This is the plan, according to Herodotus and Xenophon. The Persians couldn't storm the walls, so they decided to use the river. Upstream from the city, Cyrus set his army to work, digging massive canals and a basin to divert the flow of the Euphrates.
They were going to drain the moat.
They were going to drain the moat. They waited for a festival night, a night when he knew the Babylonians would be celebrating, drinking, and distracted. Then they opened the canals.
And the water level in the riverbed passing through the city starts to drop.
It drops rapidly until Herodotus says it was only the height of the middle of a man's thigh. And the Persian troops, under the command of a general named Gobryas, simply marched along the muddy riverbed.
Right under the massive river gates, which were now high and dry.
And into the heart of the city.
It's incredible. It plays out less like a brutal, bloody siege and more like a special ops mission. A Trojan horse, but with a river instead of a horse.
And the result was that Babylon fell with almost no resistance. In fact, contemporary Babylonian sources, like the Cyrus Cylinder and the Nabonidus Chronicle, suggest the gates were open for him, that parts of the city welcomed him.
The propaganda had worked.
It seems so. He entered the city on October 29, 539 BC, not as a destroyer, but positioning himself as a liberator.
Okay, so in the space of about a decade, he's conquered Media, Lydia, and Babylon. He's now the undisputed king of the four corners of the world. But conquering is one thing. Ruling is something else entirely. How on earth do you manage an empire that big with that many different languages, religions, and cultures?
That is the question. And that is where Cyrus the Administrator really innovates. He completely moves away from the old Assyrian model of empire.
And the Assyrian model was basically rule through terror, right?
Absolute terror. Mass deportations of entire peoples, forced assimilation, brutal public punishments to make an example of rebels. It worked for a while, but it was incredibly expensive and unstable. People who hate you are always looking for a chance to revolt.
So Cyrus tries a different approach. He invents the satrapy system.
He does. He, or perhaps more likely, his successors perfected it, but he laid the groundwork. The empire was divided into these manageable provinces called satrapies, and each one was ruled by a satrap, who was essentially a governor or a vassal king.
And he'd often appoint local nobles to these positions, right? Not just Persians.
Yes, which was a very smart move. It gave the local elites a stake in the success of the empire. But, and here's the real genius, he set up a system of checks and balances to keep the satraps from getting too powerful.
Right, because if you give a governor an army and a tax base far away from the capital, it's only a matter of time before he decides he'd rather be king himself.
Exactly. So in each satrapy, you had the satrap who handled all the civil administration and tax collection. But you also had a military general who commanded the troops in that province. And that general reported directly to Cyrus, not to the satrap.
Ah, okay.
And then you had a third official, a state secretary or king's eye, who kept the official records and also reported directly back to the central government. It was this three-pronged power structure.
That is surprisingly modern. It prevents any one person from holding all the keys to power in a province. The governor has the money, but no guns. The general has the guns, but no money. And the secretary is watching both of them.
Precisely. It's a system designed to prevent rebellion. And to keep them all connected, to make this vast empire actually function, he built the infrastructure to support it.
The Royal Road?
The Royal Road, and perhaps even more importantly, the Shaparkhana. This was the express postal relay system.
This is where we get that famous line, right?
It is. Herodotus wrote about it with awe. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds.
And that's literally the unofficial motto of the U.S. Postal Service.
It is. The U.S. Postal Service essentially borrowed it from Herodotus's description of the Persian riders. They had relay stations set up all along the Royal Road, each about a day's ride apart.
So a rider would just gallop flat out to the next station.
Hand off the message pouch to a fresh rider on a fresh horse, who would then take off. The message itself never stopped moving, 24/7. They could get a critical message from one end of the empire to the other in about a week, a journey that would take an army months.
Information is power, And when you can move information that fast, you can respond to threats before they become full-blown rebellions.
Exactly. And speaking of power, we have to mention his elite military unit, the Immortals.
Such a great name.
It was psychological warfare as much as anything. It was an elite, heavy infantry unit of exactly 10,000 soldiers. And the name Immortals came from the replacement policy. If a soldier was killed or wounded or fell sick, he was immediately replaced from a special reserve force.
So to an enemy on the battlefield, the unit never seemed to shrink. No matter how many you killed, you always faced 10,000 men.
It must have been terrifyingly demoralizing.
Yeah, absolutely. But Cyrus wasn't all business and warfare and administration. He had an aesthetic side, too. We see this at his capital, Pasargadae.
We do, in the gardens, Paradisia. And this is actually where we get our English word paradise.
Wait, really? The word paradise comes from the Persian word for garden.
It does. It comes from the old Persian paradisa, which literally means a walled enclosure or a walled garden.
So every time we talk about paradise, we are linguistically talking about a Persian garden. That's amazing.
It is. And these weren't just, vegetable patches. They were highly sophisticated geometric wonders. They used advanced irrigation with over 1,000 meters of carved limestone channels to bring water to an arid landscape. It was a statement of power, the king bringing order and life-giving water to the desert. But it was also a place of profound beauty and peace. It set the standard for garden design for centuries.
So we have Cyrus the Conqueror and Cyrus the Administrator. Now we need to talk about Cyrus the Humanitarian. I'm putting a question mark there because, again, he was an ancient conqueror. But this brings us to the Cyrus Cylinder.
This is one of the most famous and roughly most debated artifacts from the ancient world. It's in the British Museum. It's a smallish clay cylinder, looks a bit like a barrel, and it's covered in Akkadian cuneiform text.
And it was discovered in the ruins of Babylon in 1879.
Correct. And in the 20th century particularly, it became famous as the first charter of human rights.
That's a huge claim, was it?
Well, that's the debate. That label was heavily promoted by the last Shah of Iran in the 1970s, and it was even acknowledged by the United Nations at the time. But modern scholars would urge a lot of caution here.
So what is it then, if not a human rights charter?
On its face, the text is a fairly traditional Mesopotamian building dedication inscription. It follows a standard formula. It starts by denouncing the previous king, Nabonidus, calling him impious and a bad ruler. Then it praises the god Marduk for searching the world and choosing a righteous new ruler, Cyrus.
So it's political propaganda.
In that sense, yes, absolutely. It's a document designed to legitimize his conquest of Babylon in the eyes of the Babylonians themselves. But it's the policy described within the propaganda that is so revolutionary.
Okay, so what does it say he actually did?
The text records Cyrus improving the lives of the citizens of Babylon, restoring temples that had been neglected by Nabonidus, and this is the most important part, repatriating displaced peoples.
Meaning he allowed people who had been forcibly exiled by previous empires to go home.
Exactly. And this is where the profound Jewish connection comes in. Decades earlier, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II had conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the first temple, and dragged a huge portion of the Jewish population into exile in Babylon. This is the famous Babylonian captivity.
A foundational trauma in Jewish history.
A profound one. And Cyrus ends it. He issues what's known as the Edict of Restoration. He declares that the Jews are free to return to their homeland, which they called Yehud Judah.
And he doesn't just let them go, he helps them.
This is what's so mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The Bible tells us he not only allows them to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, the second temple, but he also returns the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had looted. And he even authorizes funds from the royal treasury to help pay for the construction.
Imagine being a member of that exiled community. You've been in a foreign land for generations. You think your culture, your religion is maybe ending. And then this new conqueror shows up and says, go home, here's your stuff back, and here's some cash to help rebuild your main temple.
It's why the Bible speaks of him with such unparalleled reverence. In the book of Isaiah, Cyrus is explicitly called Messiah, which literally means his anointed one.
He is the only non-Jewish figure in the entire Bible to receive that specific holy title. That is a huge deal.
It's an enormous deal.
So why did he do it? Was he secretly a believer in Yahweh? Did he have some kind of conversion experience?
There's absolutely no evidence of that. And this is where we see his political genius at work again. Remember, in Babylon, the cylinder says the god Marduk chose him.
Right.
But to the Jews, the Bible says their God, Yahweh, chose him. This was his brilliant strategy. He co-opted the local religions wherever he went. by presenting himself not as a foreign conqueror imposing his own gods, but as the chosen instrument of the local god. He made his rule legitimate in the eyes of the people he conquered.
It's the ultimate hearts and minds strategy. If you believe your own god personally sent Cyrus to rule over you, you're not going to rebel against him. You're going to see his rule as divinely ordained.
Precisely. It created incredible stability. He understood that people are more productive, more peaceful, and easier to govern when they can worship their own gods freely and live in their own ancestral homes. It was pragmatic, certainly, but the result was a degree of religious and cultural freedom that was virtually unknown in the ancient world up to that point.
It's a major aha moment in the history of governance. He realized that the cheapest way to control a population was just to let them be themselves within the framework of his empire.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So he builds this incredible, tolerant, efficient empire. But of course, all reigns must come to an end. And the death of Cyrus is, well, it's a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure story, isn't it?
It is. We don't have a definitive contemporary account of how he died. We have several conflicting stories from later writers, and they paint very different pictures.
The most famous and by far the most violent and cinematic comes from Herodotus again.
Always Herodotus for the good stories. He tells of Cyrus's final campaign against the Massagetae,
Who were they?
a nomadic, Scythian-like people living in the steppes of Central Asia, near the Sirdaria River. And they were ruled by a warrior queen named Tomyris.
A warrior queen. This story just keeps getting better.
It absolutely does. According to Herodotus, Cyrus first proposes marriage to Tomyris as a way to absorb her kingdom peacefully. She sees right through it and rejects him. So Cyrus invades.
And he tries to defeat them with a trick, not with brute force.
Yes. He sets a trap, he has his army set up a camp, leaves it lightly defended, but stocks it with a huge amount of undiluted wine. The Massagetae, who were used to drinking fermented milk and weren't familiar with strong wine, easily overrun the camp.
And they find all this wine and have a huge party.
They drink themselves into a stupor. Once they're all passed out, Cyrus leads his main force back, slaughters a huge number of them, and takes many prisoners.
And among the prisoners is Queen Tomyris' son, Spargacasus, who is leading the attack.
It is. When Spargacasus sobers up and realizes he's been captured through such a cowardly trick, he is so overcome with shame that he convinces Cyrus to unbind him, and then he commits suicide.
So Tomyris has lost a huge part of her army and her only son. She must have been enraged.
Devastated and furious, she sends a message to Cyrus, basically calling him a bloodthirsty coward for using a drug like wine to defeat her army instead of facing them in open battle. And she swears an oath that if he doesn't leave her lands, she will give him his fill of blood.
And she delivers on that promise.
She does. She gathers all her remaining forces and leads them into battle herself. Herodotus describes it as the fiercest battle he'd ever heard of. The two armies fight until they run out of arrows, then they fight with spears and daggers. In the end, the Persians are overwhelmed and defeated.
And Cyrus is killed.
Cyrus is killed, and Tomyris searches the battlefield for his body. When she finds it, she has his corpse decapitated. Then she takes a wineskin, a leather bag used for carrying wine, fills it with human blood from the battlefield, and shoves Cyrus's severed head inside.
And she says the line,
I give you your fill of blood.
Wow, that is such a metal ending. It's so visceral. A stark contrast to the Messiah and Father image we've been building.
It's a powerful story. It serves as a reminder that if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. For Herodotus, it's a moral lesson about hubris, about a great king overreaching and being brought down.
Yeah.
But it might not be true at all.
Right, because we have a completely different version from another Greek writer, Xenophon.
Yes. Xenophon, in his book, the Cyropedia, which is basically the education of Cyrus, presents a totally different end. He says Cyrus died peacefully of old age, in his bed at his capital, surrounded by his sons and loyal subjects, giving them sage advice about leadership and virtue before passing away.
That sounds a little too perfect, a little too neat.
It does. Most historians view the Cyropedia not as a strict history, but as a kind of philosophical treatise on the ideal ruler. Xenophon was using Cyrus as a model, a paragon of virtue, so a peaceful, wise death fits his narrative better than getting your head dunked in a bag of blood.
So we have two extremes, the gruesome death in battle and the peaceful death in bed. Is there any other evidence?
There's the tomb of Cyrus at Pasargadae. It still stands today in Iran.
It does, and it's surprisingly modest, isn't it? It's not a giant pyramid or some massive ornate mausoleum.
It's very humble for a man who conquered the world. It's a simple limestone structure, a small chamber on top of a 6-tiered plinth. It almost looks like a little house. And the inscription that was reported to be on it, recorded by later Greek writers like Plutarch, is hauntingly humble.
Oh man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who won the Persians their empire. Do not therefore begrudge me this bit of earth that covers my binds.
It's so powerful. It's an acknowledgement of mortality, of the fleeting nature of power. I know you will come is a message to future conquerors, future kings.
And we know that about 200 years later, another very famous conqueror did come, Alexander the Great.
Yes. After Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, he made a pilgrimage to Pasargadae to visit Cyrus's tomb.
He destroyed the Persian capital of Persepolis in a drunken rage, but he specifically spared and honored Cyrus's tomb.
He revered Cyrus. He had read Xenophon's Cyropedia and saw Cyrus as a personal hero, a role model for what a king should be. When he arrived and found that the tomb had been broken into and looted, Alexander was horrified and furious. He had the looters executed and ordered the tomb to be meticulously restored. He felt kinship with a man who had done it all 2 centuries before him.
That connection between Cyrus and Alexander really bridges the eras. So let's talk about that legacy. Why do we still talk about this man today? What is his lasting impact?
Well, that title, father, is hugely significant. Xenophon notes that his subjects called him that because he acted like a father, he bestowed benefits on them rather than just taking from them. The Babylonians called him the liberator. That's a rare legacy for any king, let alone a conqueror.
But his influence reaches way beyond the ancient world. It reaches all the way to America.
It really does. Thomas Jefferson, one of the key founding fathers of the United States, owned 2 copies of Xenophon's Cyropedia.
And he didn't just own them, he read them closely.
Very closely. His copies are filled with his own notes in the margins. Scholars who have studied these notes believe that Cyrus's ideas about governance, religious tolerance, and the need for a ruler to be virtuous and serve the people, that these ideas directly influenced Jefferson's thinking when he was drafting the Declaration of Independence and his other writings on liberty and religious freedom.
That is just wild, to think there's a thread connecting the administration of ancient Persia to the founding documents of the United States.
That's a powerful thread. And of course, his legacy in modern Iran is profound and complex. The tomb remains a site of national reverence. He is seen as a unifying figure, a symbol of Iranian cultural identity that bridges the gap between the pre-Islamic greatness of Persia and the later Islamic era.
I also saw that some Islamic scholars have theorized that Cyrus might be the figure known as Du al-Qarnayn, the two-horned one, who is mentioned in the Quran as a great and righteous ruler.
That's a theory that's out there, yes. It's not universally accepted, but the very fact that it's discussed shows how his legacy has been adapted and reinterpreted across different cultures and religions for millennia.
So from the humiliator or the son to the father, the Messiah, and maybe even an inspiration for modern democracy, it's one heck of a resume.
It truly is. He took a world of fragmented, constantly warring states and showed them that it was possible to rule a diverse, multicultural empire, not just with force, but with a degree of respect and pragmatism that was decades, even centuries, ahead of its time.
So let's just try and wrap this all up. We've gone from the baby who was supposed to be left on a mountain to die, to the shepherd boy playing king, to the military genius with the camel strategy, to the king who literally walked into Babylon on a dry riverbed.
And the man who sent the exiles home, who funded the rebuilding of their temple.
Exactly. And that brings us, I think, to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. We're left with these 2 profoundly conflicting images of his death. Xenophon's peaceful sage dying in bed, surrounded by family,
and Herodotus' headless corpse on a brutal battlefield with a vengeful queen shouting at his severed head.
And that contrast brings up the ultimate question of his entire reign. This policy of tolerance that he's so famous for, letting the Jews rebuild the temple, letting the Babylonians worship Marduk, letting people live their own lives. Was it a genuine moral choice? Was he, at his core, a good man?
Or was it simply the most pragmatic, cynical, and effective way to rule a massive, diverse empire without having it constantly erupt in rebellion? Was it just good business?
And does the distinction even matter in the end? If you're that Jewish exile who gets to go home and see the temple rebuilt, or if you're a Babylonian farmer who isn't being taxed to death or having your gods insulted, do you care if the king is doing it out of the goodness of his heart or just to keep his imperial profit margins high and his administrative headaches low?
That's the question, isn't it? We often want our historical heroes to be morally pure, to have the best intentions. But in the brutal game of empire, perhaps the result, freedom for thousands, stability for millions, decades of relative peace, is more important than the ruler's private intent.
Something to think about. That's it for this deep dive into the life and legacy of Cyrus the Great. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you on the next one.